All right, so we're going to be looking at what is the quadratic formula and when is it to be used. So this is going to be a really short video just answering these beginning questions. So if we look at the quadratic formula, if we see that word quadratic, is a formula that is going to help us solve a quadratic equation. So we've been dealing with quadratic equations. And up until this point, we have used the methods of factoring and square root method to be able to solve the quadratic formula, or solve a quadratic equation. We are now going to look at a formula that can be used to solve any quadratic equation. And that formula uses the A, the B, and the C of a quadratic equation. And our formula is right here. And we're going to talk about the components of the formula in a different video. But right now we are just looking at what it is and when do we use it. So what it does is tell us exactly where the parabola crosses over the x-axis. And like we have talked in using other methods, there's always a possibility that we will end up with two solutions, or two x-intercepts, or two roots, or a possibility that there will just be one x-intercept, one root, one solution, or that there are no x-intercepts, meaning that our parabola never crosses over the x-axis. So basically, the quadratic formula will tell us exactly what we found out by factoring or square root. So now you're going to look at that we have another method to be able to solve a quadratic equation. Now the question becomes, well, when do we use this? Well, we want to try to get in our head that the first thing that we always try is factoring. So if you look at the first thing here about when do we use quadratic formula, it says when it does not factor. After we try factoring, we want to use square root method if that doesn't work. And notice it says you cannot use the square root method. So that's when we want to try the quadratic formula. So if you look at this, if I tried to factor x squared minus 11x minus 15, x times x, my negative 15 would mean that this would be either negative 1 and a positive 15, or 1 and a negative 15, or negative 3 and positive 5, or positive 3 and negative 5. None of those combinations will produce the negative 11x that we have in this middle term right here. So therefore, for this particular problem, we would say that this cannot factor. So that's my first step in determining when I would use the quadratic formula. I've looked at it. This does not factor. Okay. Then if I would look at this, I would say, well, can I use the square root method? And remember that for the square root method, it has to be missing that middle term. We talk about this being ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. For us to do the square root method, this term has to be missing. And since it is present in this problem, then I cannot do the square root method. And so now, since I have ruled out the being able to factor and I have ruled out the square root, now what I would say is that for this particular problem, I would have to use the quadratic formula. Now, in a different video, we'll learn more about how to use it, but this video was just to cover what it is. It's a formula that helps us solve a quadratic equation to find the x-intercepts. And when do we use it? Well, we use it when we cannot factor and when we cannot use the square root method.